Hi everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, what we want to talk about is the place of emotion in worship and religion. And this is not something that gets talked about a whole lot, but it's definitely relevant. As we discuss this idea of emotion, what's interesting is that as we look out at the congregations around us, many of them exist on one or the other extreme of the emotional spectrum. Let me explain what I mean by that. A lot of churches, what really matters to them is this, and they are emotionally driven. And the idea is that the more emotion that you can have, the better. And that's what we're all about. We're all about stirring people up. We're all about getting people excited. And the amount of emotion that you show in the worship service is, in their minds, directly proportional to your spiritual maturity or your Christ-likeness. The focus is on emotion, and it doesn't necessarily matter if the lesson that you listened to was theologically without depth or the songs that you're singing are lyrically shallow. People will still be in the pews, oh yes! On the other extreme of the perspective is the people who care about the truth. And you might say, well, wait a second. Isn't that a good thing to care about the truth? And the answer to that is yes, it is a good thing. The only problem with this far end of the perspective, though, is that these people, in a response not to look like these people, do all their worshiping with no emotion at all. They don't smile when they sing about heaven. They don't cry when they talk about hell. They go through all the acts of worship without their facial expression changing one time, because if it did, somebody in their congregation might think they're over here with these guys on the liberal side. And so what they're singing about and what they're talking about is true, but they've extracted all of the emotion that should come along with that truth, and they've taken it out. I guess if you wanted to, you could probably make a third extreme, and you could put it down here, and that is people who intellectually have an understanding that worship should bring about a certain emotion. And whether they feel that or not, they fake it because it's expected of them. Do you know anybody who gets up to lead worship and they're a totally different person in front of the congregation than they are in real life? You ever know a preacher or maybe a song leader who's out in the foyer and he's complaining about his job, he's complaining about his wife, he's complaining about just about everything he could complain about, and then once he gets up in front of the congregation, he's like, "It's such a blessing to worship God today. I'm glad everyone's here." Okay, but in all seriousness, we've looked at these extremes of our spectrum, and it still leaves us with the question, where does emotion belong in worship? I think the first thing to point out is that emotion definitely belongs in Christianity, in the Christian lifestyle, and in worship specifically. You think about this, when we're talking about the scriptures or we're worshiping God in song, we are talking about the greatest realities that exist on the earth. And if those things cannot pull on us emotionally, what can? When I'm talking about how my soul was lost and I was headed for an eternal punishment, and yet God's grace stepped in and through His sacrifice saved me so I could live with Him forever in pleasure and in glory, if that doesn't pull on your heart and the stories that surround that in the scriptures can't pull on your heartstrings to some extent, I dare say there's something wrong with your faith. If I can cry at the birth of my child, but I've never been emotional at becoming a child of God, something's wrong. If I can become passionate about some great historical sporting event and talk about it with vigor, and yet I can't talk about the sovereignty of the cross without some emotion, something's wrong. Human beings are creatures who are made to have emotional responses to great moments of truth. And I think in that understanding, we can find the answer to where emotion belongs in religion. I want to read you a quote that I thought sums it up very well. The difference between emotionalism and genuine emotion is that genuine emotion is awakened by truth. Let me read it again for you. The difference between emotionalism, that's over here, and true emotion is that it is awakened by the truth. And so, like so many other things that we find in life, the truth actually lies somewhere in the middle. And that is that neither one of these should be excluded from our worship. In hearing the truth, and hearing the great theological truths, and singing the songs with the great lyrical truths in them, there should be a joining together of that truth and that emotion right here in the middle. truth is certainly not a bad thing. And emotion in and of itself is not a bad thing. And this emotion will be awakened in a believer and in a Christian during worship when the great truths of what we are singing about and preaching about hit them in their heart and they respond to those truths. For those of us who are over here in this camp, what we need to remember is that emotion is not wrong as long as that emotion is spurred by a realization of truth. For those of us who are a little bit more over on this side, we need to remember that emotion in and of itself is not pleasing to God. Emotion for emotion's sake is not pleasing to God, but it is pleasing to God when it is aligned with and awakened by what is true and what is found in God's scriptures and in the gospel. I hope this video has been of some assistance to you. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that. Share the video, like the video, comment down below. This is definitely an interesting topic. Love to hear your comments. See you next time.